This was just our humble effort to bring our history to the fore. As we all know, it isn't discussed enough. We're going to have some speeches now. But I wanted to, first, before the speeches begin, I wanted to draw your attention to these two screens here. One's over there and one's over here. We had some technical difficulties, but, we're steadfast with Rajput. We don't give up. So, we keep trying, and in the face of adversity, we don't give up. We face it with a bold face, and we move on forward. So, if you read these screens, we couldn't encapsulate everything in the video. We didn't have too much time at the venue, but our community formed the bulk of the British Indian Army. So, whether it's the Dogra Regiment, whether it was the Jodhpur Lancers, the Nawanagar Lancers, Bhavnagar Lancers, Bikaner Rasala, Ganga Rasala, whether it's the Rajput Regiment, the Rajputana Regiment, Sikh Regiment, Punjab Regiment, they all had significant Rajput population in those regiments. But because we are a diverse community, which is reflected in the Muslim, Sikh, and Hindu communities broadly, our contributions are often veiled under these broader labels. And that's a great disservice to everybody that's passed away in service of their own kings and their own tribes and clans. Especially because if you see the way our history is narrated in popular discourse, is they'll just say Indian troops. And of course that's an apt description. It's not inaccurate. It's just, India is a very diverse country, right? The world is a diverse place. If you veil our contribution, you've basically erased the contribution of more than 500,000 soldiers. And you've overlooked their challenges, you've overlooked their motivations, you've overlooked everything in their personal life and their social life and how they shaped history, how they shaped the world we live in today. And that's what we've been enduring for the last 75 odd years. Because our history is, for some, on the left or maybe even on the right, it becomes, I would say, denigrated and reduced to political, partisan themes. So, we don't fall in. We had the largest farming community in India across at least 15 states. We have the largest farming community. We don't get the tag of farmer community. Had the greatest military contribution. We don't get the tag of the military community. We are considered, we're blocked up with the colonial powers because of our association with them, but they don't take into account how much resistance was offered to the British. If the Kshatriya community was the bulk of the support for the British Empire, they were also the foremost force that rebelled against the British. No one has fought the British more than the Rajput community. No one supported the British more than the Rajput community. We're a diverse community with diverse interests at different times, at different places. We're not a homogenous community in that sense, in political interests. But because of our very open-mindedness and our independent, political structures, very decentralized political structure, we've been glossed over in such a way that it's as if millions of people didn't die in Flanders. We wear a poppy, right? Our ancestors shed blood in Flanders, but nobody knows about that. We shed blood in the Middle East, nobody knows about that. We fought in Africa, nobody knows about that. No one knows how we shaped the world, and it's very unfortunate when you throw everything in the past under the bus. So if you hate everything that's colonial, and granted, I don't have to explain the negative aspects of colonialism. But once you throw everything under the rug, you overlook the people that have laid the foundations for a brighter future that we're enjoying today, which do also have colonial foundations. Democratization was just as much a elite project as it was a grassroots project. And British colonialism and Rajputs, they played a formidable role in laying the foundations for democracy, especially Maharaja Ganga Singh Ji, who started implementing reforms that were unheard of in his day and age. Maharaja Hari Singh Ji of Jammu and Kashmir was one of the first monarchs to finally resist the Brahminical hold on temples and permit Dalits to enter temples against the established patriarchy of the Brahminical order. And that's completely overlooked. There is no discussion on the Katoch. There's no discussion on the fact that certain regiments were not homogenous. So the Sikh regiment had different Rajputs, Punjab regiment had different Rajputs in it. And we got Sikhs, we got Muslims, we got Hindu Rajputs too. But because these labels are used to describe the participants, we're completely overlooked. If you look at Punjab's contribution to the world wars, the greatest contribution to the world wars in Punjab, number one, is of Sikhs, of course, but that includes Rajputs, and then right beside them, right at par, is the Muslim Rajputs of Punjab. And in World War II, when the Imperial War Cabinet was being held, Maharaja Hari Singh Ji was part of it, who was the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, and right beside them was Feroz Khan Noon, who was a Bhatti Rajput, who went on to become the Prime Minister of Pakistan. But because one was Muslim, one was Hindu, and when we discussed these things, we overlooked the fact that there was two Rajputs in the Imperial War Cabinet in World War II. Can you imagine how frustrating it is that none of our people or no one in society is being told that two of the non-white members in the Second World War's Imperial War Cabinet for the Allied powers were Rajputs? We have streets dedicated to Winston Churchill, as they should be. We have streets dedicated to a lot of colonial war heroes, and that's commendable. We appreciate that. But what happened after independence was all of our contributions to the world wars were thrown in the trash can. Nobody wanted to discuss them, even though the kings themselves were the people that were propelling the turn towards democratization. There would be no Republic of India if the colonial powers or the monarchs didn't come together and, come for a unified state. The democracy that we enjoy here in the West today as well is part and parcel of our ancestors' contributions. If we can stake a claim on our right to reside in the West, it's because of people like Maharaja Ganga Singh Ji and everybody else that fought these wars. But remarkably, I'm not surprised, we have to understand, a lot of people have been led to believe that if you discuss Rajput history, you're discussing, quote unquote, the history of oppressors, which is so far-fetched and it's so obscurist that it's a very interesting way to unite all the various different aspects of this community that range from 25 states, and you're just going to lump them all together in one category, especially when they've contributed more for land reforms, more for the upliftment of the poor, more for people fighting against Hitler than anybody else in the subcontinent. So we're going to have a few more speeches. I've been waiting actually to discuss these things because what's happened is, sorry, we just have some guests coming. I just want to make sure this event is very important just so our community can finally have a voice for itself. Beyond the confines of Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, beyond the confines of Hindutva, beyond the confines of colonialism, all these labels that are used to silence our history and marginalize us further, why should we not be proud of our contributions to the wars? We wear the poppy in honor of our ancestors. The poppies were blooming in Flanders, and our ancestors' blood was nurturing those plants. So if we're not going to talk about it, we know that nobody else wants to talk about it, probably because they have very minimal contribution. And I'm not afraid to say that. The reason I'm not afraid to say that is because for the longest time, we've been denied our contribution. And if we don't speak up now, going forward, the young kids here, I'm pretty sure they weren't even aware of these things, right? So we gather here today to commemorate the cessation of World War I and II, and to remember those who sacrificed their lives so that we can live free. Live with dignity, with our heads held high. And with such commemoration comes a responsibility to honor these sacrifices. And to honor is not to merely pay homage or tribute. To honor sacrifice is to defend that for which these sacrifices were made, for freedom. The freedom we often take for granted today, which is vulnerable and ever obliges us to be vigilant and courageous. For over the last few years, we've become deeply aware of how crucial freedoms are to a healthy democracy and a healthy society. We've felt and witnessed the impact of the curtailing of freedom on individuals, on families, on communities, on nations. Therefore, it's our duty to remain steadfast in our defense of freedom and to never waver in its defense, just like our ancestors never did. Our ancestors galloped towards cannons on horseback, marched against rapid machine gun fire for no regard for their life in another continent's war. So, because we are Canadian and we're also Rajput, we have multi-layered identities. We do not personally differentiate between the sacrifices made by Canadian and Indian soldiers in the world wars. It was a collective effort for a collective cause. Indeed, whether we like it or not, the foundations of our democracy lie in colonialism, and many leading colonial actors themselves laid these foundations. And I recall a recent statement made by Bill Maher where he lauds the West for the ideals of free speech, scientific inquiry, the rule of law, etc. But I would say that though they may have seemed to be Western values, they were not always applied equally, and that it was the role of the princely states and stalwarts such as Maharaja Ganga Singh Ji, who was a signatory of the Treaty of Versailles, that these values and ideals became universally applied. You see, democracy was very selective in its original form. If you recall Greece or Athens and everything, it was a very select few people in the society that could have a role in decision making. And the Rajputs played a significant role in changing that, in empowering the subjects. And just like how a lot of people expect gratitude for allowing refugees in their country, or allowing our families to come settle here, we appreciate that. We understand, we are grateful for people. Hold on, yeah, so we are grateful for, the country being a welcoming place, but where's our gratitude? Do you see it anywhere? You ever recall in your personal life, anybody ever paid attention to the over 500,000 people that were Rajputs that fought in the world wars?
No.
It's remarkable how someone can just erase your history and expect us not to talk about it because we're the oppressors. No, we freed the globe from Nazism. We defeated the Ottomans. And if you saw a picture here, we had Japan surrendering to General Nathu Singh Rathod. But who's going to talk about that? Who's going to talk about Imperial Japan surrendering to Rajputs that defeated Russia? Imperial Japan defeated Russia in 1904, or 1905, could be wrong. And we defeated the Japanese, we defeated the Ottomans, the Caliphate. But who's going to pay tribute if we don't pay tribute? And it's time we start speaking about this, because what's happening, the left and the right have marginalized this diverse community's diverse history to such an extent that it's instilled fear of being, viewed as somebody who's an apologist. Facts are not an apology. They're not an excuse, they're facts. They're value neutral. They're not negative or positive. They're just facts. It's not a partisan issue. Facts should not be partisan. Nevertheless, having some technical difficulties, as always. You know why? Because even the technology doesn't want us to speak up, okay? Even the technology is against us. That's how nature works. And you guys should know it's true. It's not even a joke. Okay. It's crucial to remember the role of Kshatriyas, not only because it was neglected at an institutional or political level, but it's also lost its place in our own community's collective memory. Of the 1.5 million Indian soldiers that fought in World War I, the majority were Rajputs. Of the 2.5 million Indians that served in World War II, the majority again were Rajputs. Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh Rajputs accounted for the bulk of British Indian soldiers. Why they have slipped from memory is due to an unfortunate trend in politics. In many ways, their exclusion from discourse is an early example of how ideology can run amok and alter the rendition of history, how it can omit facts to create narratives, and how these narratives can thus be utilized, be weaponized to curtail the same freedoms that millions died for. No one remembers the sacrifice of Indian soldiers in India because they were considered A, either soldiers serving a foreign empire, or B, denigrated as cannon fodder. To denigrate volunteers as cannon fodder is so disrespectful and so disheartening and hurtful. It's difficult to come up with the words to even describe how we feel as a community when we're called cannon fodder, despite having contributed the most soldiers to the war effort from the Indian subcontinent. Mayor Brown, thank you for coming. I just wanted to give you a quick fact that you missed right now. Out of the 1.5 million Indian soldiers that served in World War I and the 2.5 million that served in World War II, the vast majority were Rajputs. I would say probably 50% or more came from the Rajput community. The Rajputs found their place in the imperial war cabinets of both world wars. They served alongside King George. They were ADC to King George himself. King George himself tied the Victoria Cross on many members of our community. And there are people in our community today in Canada whose ancestors contributed thousands of soldiers to the war effort, thousands. The Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir and the Maharaja of Kangra contributed 20,000 troops to the Dogra regiment. And no one remembers the sacrifices because we were either cannon fodder or serving a foreign empire. Neither description wholly captures the various motivations, causes, views, sentiments of those on the front lines or their families. So we must remember, not most of these soldiers were indeed volunteers. Admittedly, there were some that wrote letters complaining about their participation in the war. I've come across such letters myself, but they weren't from the Rajputs. If you read Rajput letters from the wars, people were jubilant to serve the crown, jubilant to serve their kings, jubilant to serve on the front lines. They found no higher purpose on earth than to serve on a battlefield. And their primary motivation was their religion, is Kshatriya Dharma, to fight for a just war. And they found World War I to be a just war, World War II to be a just war. And the fact that their history has been veiled and overlooked and deliberately marginalized, deliberately not being discussed, overlooked, is very, very hurtful. I can't even express how much it bothers me. Well, you guys can probably get an example of it. We're trying to put this event together. We're trying to bring light to all of our contributions. Even in the Punjab and the Sikh regiments, there were significant portions of Rajputs, and we're a diverse community. We're Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs, so our contribution gets veiled under these labels. It is true that no one fought the British more than the Kshatriyas, and it's also true that we were the premier organs of colonial rule in India, and we were its most fierce opponents. There's nothing wrong with that. It's history. We don't have to make history so partisan that we can't discuss basic facts. Of course, some people from our community who supported the Crown, it's not that the Crown did everything bad. They laid the foundations for democracy. If the foundations of democracy were laid in India, they were laid by the kings and the British monarchs themselves. Often Winston Churchill is demonized, but the fact that he sat side by side and he was very respectful and admired the Rajput kings is overlooked. Winston Churchill's often demonized for his alleged role in the Bengal famine, but Dr. Vandana Shiva or Amartya Sen, a Nobel laureate, both contest that view. They both ascribed the Bengal famine to other causes. So there's a lot of hypocrisy on those that are criticizing Winston Churchill and his Rajput allies. Of course, he didn't want democracy and the empire to, the sun to set on the British Empire. There's quotes available of that. But the issue is, how do you overlook the fact that most of his friends were Rajputs who were indeed encouraging the democratization of the state in his presence, and openly so, in the Hall of Mirrors, signing the Treaty of Versailles, which laid the foundations of modern India. We had people like General Shah Nawaz Khan, who was a leading figure, who allied himself with Hitler. We don't have to appreciate that. We don't have to support that. We just have to acknowledge it. We just have to acknowledge that certain people fought on the side of the Axis powers, certain on the Allied powers. But we're here today because of our ancestors fighting on the side of the Allied powers. And we've contributed millions of soldiers for this. We've contributed more than any other community on the Indian subcontinent. But nobody wants to talk about our history because it's too politically incorrect to discuss the role of a community just because they were allied with the foreign power, irrespective of the fact that everybody else was too. So it's kind of hypocritical to say the least. And that's what happens when you reduce history to a binary of oppressed and oppressor. You can't reduce our community to the oppressed community. You can't reduce us to the oppressed community. It's a diverse community, diverse history. You had kings fighting each other. You had different barons and different lords associating themselves or aligning themselves with different global powers. It was a complex time, and that's how politics was. And there's people in our community here today whose ancestors have sat with the crown, who are still close with the crown. They have a lot of mutual respect. There's a lot of admiration. And there's none of that bitterness that we see today in politics. So such renditions of history have stripped the voice of millions and remarkably does so in our name. It strips us of our history in our name, trying to protect us from our own oppressive history somehow. So we don't want others on a particular end of a political spectrum to claim they speak for us. Our ancestors didn't fight in Flanders or the Middle East or against Imperial Japan and the Ottomans so that we would be told what to think, be told what to say, and what not to say. It's our duty to honor their sacrifice, and we do so today by saying thank you for silencing us as you claim to speak for us, but we're okay on our own. And we'd like to go back to enjoying these hard-earned freedoms. Because when Rajput princely states contributed to the war effort, they did so out of their own volition, and if it was not for their sacrifices, India would not have gained its independence, and neither would Canada. World wars were more than just colonial wars. Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Indigenous, Black Canadians, everybody fought alongside Canadians of European descent. There's no greater bond than to fight and die together. It is a bond that must be remembered and cherished. It's the greatest bond, to sacrifice your life for somebody else. There's no greater bond than that. And the Katoch clan of Kangra, whose forebears include none other than Porus, the mighty king who challenged the might of Alexander the Great, served alongside the allies across the globe. The descendants of Rajput Samrat Mihir Bhoj fought valiantly in Europe. The Tomers, the Kushwaha, the Rathore, Sasodia, Patania, Jala, Chauhan, Gohil, Jadeja. How many clans, ruling families fought? Not one of them is mentioned today. Probably close to 1 million Rajputs fought in both world wars, and not a single one of them is mentioned today. Not a single one. Signing the Treaty of Versailles, 2 Rajputs in the Imperial War Cabinet in World War II after defeating Hitler, and not a single mention of their contribution, because we get swept under the rug of Hindu. We get swept under the rug of Muslim. We get swept under the rug of Sikh. Of course, these are integral parts of our identity. Of course, our communities are attached to these religious views, and of course, we respect them, we love them. They're all ours. Right? They're not foreign to us. We understand they're part of our community. But when you make the religion of a community their primary identifying factor, you've basically silenced the entire community, and you've begun to speak for them. We don't want anybody else speaking for us anymore. Maharaja Ganga Singh Ji of Bikaner was the signatory of the Treaty of Versailles and was one of the few voices of reason who urged restraint and compassion warning that the treaty would breed resentment and plant seeds of yet another war, and the accuracy of his forecast is not lost upon us. The Rajputana regiment, the Dewana Lancers, so many regiments were wholly, if not partially, comprised of Rajputs. That being said, you know, as Hindu Rajputs, we are still part of a broader Hindu community. You know, we fall in a lot of different layers. The first Hindu temple was established in 1967 in downtown Toronto by my uncle and everybody else. They're still serving in the temple in Toronto downtown, oldest temple in North America. But it's not been recognized as a heritage site. And our relatives have fought in the wars. Our relatives have sat with the Queen and King. And despite what everybody says about the West and the colonial powers in Britain, there were people on our side as well that were very discriminatory, that nobody else wants to talk about. General Nathu Singh Rathore, who accepted the surrender of the Japanese forces, would never dine with British officers because he found them to be impure, because they ate beef. He wouldn't dine with them, he wouldn't drink with them, but he served on the battlefield with them. So history is very complex. You can't brush him under the idea of being an oppressor. You can't brush him under the oppressed. Everybody had different interests, but they played a formidable role in the wars, but nobody wants to talk about it because it doesn't fit their partisan view, or it doesn't fit a particular thematic political approach, you know, whatever may be dominant at a given time. And so what's happening is, because we're such a diverse community with so many various kingdoms that fought on different sides of different wars across history, what's happening is our history is being put to the side, despite being the biggest we probably contributed as much as soldiers to the world wars from our own community alone than Canada itself. So our history is Canadian history. It's the history of the Commonwealth. It's the history of the British Empire. If you recall, the time when our Maharajas and our soldiers were winning Victoria Crosses and military crosses, Order of the British Empire, and when they're serving and they're sacrificing their lives in the West, and they're also, you know, ruling with the British powers, you know, there were also those that were fighting them. So it's complicated, but we have to talk about everybody, and we have to remember everybody, and we have to remember that we're here because of their sacrifices today. And I cannot stress this enough. I've tried different avenues. We've spoken with different heritage organizations. We've spoken with different political parties, politicians, and I would say that it goes to show how deficient our politics is today, that they're afraid to speak about certain contributions because they might be looked at as being an apologist, or maybe praising or you know, supporting colonialism. That's very far from the fact. We have to understand that these wars, they weren't just colonial wars. They laid the foundations of our democracy today. So in the future, we're going to go on and we're going to do more events. We're going to bring this to the fore. And you have to also remember why the oppressed and oppressor binary is inappropriate, because when Maharaja Ganga Singh Ji was serving as ADC to King George, the labor laws in England were very poor. We had child labor, right? So it's very important we don't fall into these binaries that are imposed on us in modern discourse. A lot of our people enjoyed privileges better than most of the working class in Europe. And a lot of them fought Europe, dying for those people's rights too. So benevolent rulers, not just oppressive rulers, benevolent rulers, and we have to speak up about it, because they'll categorize us as they want if we don't speak up about it. So thank you very much for coming. We're going to have a few more speeches from our esteemed members. Okay, thank you very much, guys. That was my 2 cents on our history.